Good afternoon, good evening, should I say, everybody. I'd like to introduce Amryt Pharma. Amryt, many of you will have heard this story before, but I wanted to update you on what we've been doing recently. Amryt is a company that acquires, develops, and commercializes assets in the rare and orphan disease space. So there are thought to be over 7,000 rare diseases out there, and probably only 5% of those actually have products approved on the market at this point in time. The guys on Wall Street will tell you that the value of this market by 2024 will be north of $240 billion US. It has a compound annual growth rate at this point in time of approximately 12%, which is double the standard rate in the traditional biopharma space. So let me tell you a little about what we're doing to address some of these issues. So we are a commercial orphan drug company. So we are focused on commercializing assets as well as acquiring and developing them. We target very specifically rare diseases, and rare diseases where there is a huge unmet medical need. So in essence, where there's nothing out there on the market already. We made a very significant transaction earlier this year. So in September, we closed a transaction whereby we acquired a company which was in revenue terms was 9 times larger than we are. Our pro forma revenues for 2018 based on the combined company were $136.5 million US. And in the 9 months to 30th of September, our year-on-year growth was 20% compared with the same period in 2018. We have a very strong, proven commercial, regulatory, clinical team in place already. And on top of that, we have a very strong commercial pipeline, commercial assets already on the market, but also a pipeline of assets coming through. The lead one at this point in time is an asset called AP101, which is currently in phase 3. So that's the latest stage of clinical development. This is targeting a disorder called epidermolysis bullosa, and I'll talk a little about that in a few moments. Again, if you talk to the guys on Wall Street, they'll tell you, because there's nothing out there on the market at this point in time for that condition, this is north of a €1 billion opportunity. Having acquired Agirion, we are very much on track with the integration of that organization at this point in time, and we have multiple growth opportunities in place to continue to grow the business moving forward. We are actually a relatively young organization. So we were formed in 2015. We were in stealth mode for the first year. We came out of stealth mode in June 2016, and we did 3 deals in a single day. So we acquired 2 companies, one in Germany, one in Switzerland, and we reversed into an oil and gas shell company on the AIM market in London. 2017, we commenced a phase 3 study, the largest phase 3 study that will ever be conducted in epidermolysis bullosa. And in 2018, having previously acquired the rights to a product called Lojuxta from Agirion, we expanded the rights to cover Russia and CIS. And we got pediatric rare disease designation awarded by FDA for our AP101 asset. And again, I'll talk a little about that and why that's particularly valuable to us at this point in time. In March 2018, we acquired from University College Dublin global rights to a non-viral gene therapy platform, which we now call AP103. 2019 has been a momentous year for Amryt. We had a positive readout of our interim analysis of our phase 3E study back in January. And then, as I mentioned, in Q3, we closed the acquisition of Agirion. And more recently, we got fast track designation by the FDA for our AP101 asset. So why invest in Amryt? We believe we are spectacularly undervalued, and I'm happy to give you numbers of comparators out there on the market if you're interested in that. We are a revenue-generating and growing rare and orphan disease company. We have, as I mentioned, a portfolio of innovative assets already on the market and in late-stage development. Not only that, we're looking at maximizing the value of those by, in essence, looking at alternative indications for them. So as we describe them, life cycle opportunities. We have an extremely experienced management team with a proven track record in this space. And over time, a relatively short period of time, we've been able to build a very scalable commercial, regulatory, and clinical medical infrastructure and continue to build that out as we speak. Having executed on this transaction earlier this year, we're now in a position to deliver sustainable growth, and we also have now the financial flexibility to continue to do really interesting transactions in the space. A little about our leadership team. So at top left is Joe Wiley. Joe is a physician by training, worked in the private equity and venture capital space, headed up the European office of Sofinova Ventures, one of the largest California-based venture capital companies. Rory Nealon's a traditional CFO, worked in investment banking, and then was the chief financial officer of a company called Trinity Biotech, an Irish NASDAQ-listed organization. You'll see here a number of my colleagues have previously worked at Amryt Pharmaceuticals, the company we acquired earlier this year. So my colleague David Ullman, our Chief Commercial Officer, was formerly Senior Vice President of Marketing at Celgene. Celgene, as many of you will have seen, was acquired by Bristol Myers Squibb last week for $74 billion. So Dave is a very capable commercial guy. Mark Summeray is our Chief Medical Officer. Mark was a guy who was able to get Lojuxta, our lead, one of our commercial assets. He was able to get that approved by the FDA in a 27-patient open-label study. So Mark has great capabilities of working with regulators. And likewise, my colleague Helen Phillips, who's head of medical affairs, was also previously at Agerion. If I'd shown you this map in March of this year, I would have just said Amryt has a footprint here in Europe and growing out into Russia, CIS, and also operations in the Middle East. Following the acquisition of Agerion, we now have commercial operations across North America and increasingly into Latin America as well, looking now at building out in Australasia. Let me talk about our commercial assets. So these are assets that are already on the market that are generating revenues. So this is a product called, the drug molecule is called Amryt. It has two trade names, one in the US and one in Europe. So in US it's called Juxtapid, in Europe it's called Lojuxta. This treats a very rare lipid disorder called homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. Prevalence of that is about 1 in a million. So these folks have 10 times the LDL-C levels that you or I would have. They will often have heart attacks in their early teens, and untreated they tend to die by the time they're around about 18. So this product has been approved in both Europe and the US as an adjunct to a low-fat diet to lower lipids in patients with HoFH. It's patent protected out into 2027, 2028 in the US and Europe. This is a product which we've had since 2016 in Europe, and we have been very successful with it. So Agerion decided to take this product off the market, to withdraw this product from the market in 2016. We contacted them at that point and said, we'll take it off your hands. So we did a really interesting deal. We acquired this with no upfronts. This is purely a royalty deal. However, we were able to double sales of this in the first 2 years following acquisition of this asset. So what we're going to do now is deploy our proven strategy for success with this asset in the US with the Juxtapid asset. We're also looking at life cycle opportunities for this. So as I say, life cycle opportunities, in essence what you're doing is you're taking the drug, but you're looking at alternative indications for them. As I mentioned, this is a genetic disorder, so kids will suffer from this. When this product was originally approved, the clinical studies were only in adults, so we're about to kick off a study in pediatric patients with homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. We're also looking at another rare lipid disorder called familial chylomicronemia syndrome. So we're currently running an investigator-initiated study in Italy in this indication. The second commercial asset we have is a product called metroleptin. Again, has two trade names, Mylept in the US, Mylepta in Europe. So what does this do? This treats a series of disorders called lipodystrophies. So lipodystrophies occur if you have very little or no subcutaneous adipose tissue. Adipose tissue releases a hormone called leptin, and if you don't release that hormone called leptin, you have a broad metabolic syndrome ranging from very severe diabetes, which is effectively you can't treat with insulin. You have very high triglyceride levels, you end up with chronic pancreatitis, and you end up with fat being deposited in various different areas of your body, and you end up with fatty liver disease. Again, this product has been approved in both Europe and the US. It was approved in the US back in 2014 for generalized lipodystrophy. Last year it was approved in Europe for both generalized and partial lipodystrophy. So it has a broader label here in Europe than it does in the US. Global revenues in 2018 was $71.4 million US, and that's primarily from the US sales of this asset, because as I mentioned, it was only approved in July 2018. We believe there's a huge growth opportunity for this in Europe. Not only is the growth because it hasn't previously been marketed here, but the prevalence of partial lipodystrophy is approximately 3 times that of generalized lipodystrophy. So there's a very significant growth opportunity here. One of the big issues for us right now is working with the FDA and trying to find a way forward with the FDA to expand the label into partial lipodystrophy in the US. And as I mentioned, my colleague Mark Summeray, our Chief Medical Officer, who has done some very interesting things in working with the FDA previously, is currently in discussion with them around potentially getting this product approved. We believe we may need to conduct a phase 3 study, but at this point in time, the jury is out on that one. In the interest of time, I'll skip over this, but this really just repeats what I've just been telling you. So in addition to our commercial assets, we also have a rich development pipeline. The lead development asset is an asset called AP101, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. As I mentioned, we're looking at Mylept in partial lipodystrophy. We're looking at Lojuxta in both pediatric HoFH and also familial chylomicronemia syndrome. I'll talk a little about AP101 and why we're currently also looking at it in some other indications in a moment. And AP103 is our non-viral gene therapy platform, which again is targeting epidermolysis bullosa. Okay, a little about EB. So we're trying to build a franchise around EB. We have AP101, which is our lead development asset in phase 3, and AP103, which is in preclinical. EB is a truly hideous disorder, and it's effectively a series of hereditary skin conditions whereby the mucous membranes and the skin is affected by a lack of specific proteins. And those proteins, in essence, hold the skin together. So if you look at a condition like recessive dystrophic EB, which is really where we believe the main part of the market is here, these unfortunate kids are born without a thing called collagen 7. So if you imagine collagen 7 as being like Velcro holding your skin together, if you don't have that Velcro holding your skin together, the slightest knock against your skin leads to the skin either blistering and then causing and creating a wound, or actually falling away, sloughing off. So AP1, so apologies for the images here, but this is the reality of EB. So these children are can be born with up to 80% of their body surface area, or they can have up to 80% of their body surface area covered in wounds. They're in essence born with this condition. It's a genetic condition. AP101 is an interesting asset. We acquired this from a company called Birkin back in 2016. Birkin was an organization who had done a very small pilot study in EB, which these images down here show you the outcome of the small pilot clinical study. And in essence, this was positive. They went to speak to the European Medicines Agency about the way forward for this as an indication. And instead of moving forward with this, they then decided to develop the asset in partial thickness wounds. So they went ahead and conducted the study conducted 3 studies in partial thickness wounds, 2 in split thickness skin grafts, 1 in secondary degree burns, and got the product approved in Europe for that condition. So this product has already been approved in Europe. However, it's never been launched. We acquired the company at the point prior to launch. It's worth pointing out that patients with EB have partial thickness wounds, so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this product has a biological activity and potentially works in this condition. So what does this asset do? It promotes the differentiation and migration of keratinocytes. In other words, it accelerates wound healing in patients with EB. So we're currently conducting a multi-center phase 3 study in EB. I believe the numbers are quite significant here. We are currently conducting this study in 55 centers worldwide in 27 countries. So this is a double-blind, randomized, placebo phase 3 study. We're looking for 230 evaluable patients, and the primary efficacy endpoint here is the proportion of target wounds that are healed by day 45. So we started this study back in 2017. We got pediatric rare disease designation for this in 2018. We're looking at top-line data of this now by the end of H1 2020. Why do I keep talking about pediatric rare disease designation? If this asset is approved and approved by the FDA and hits the market, we will then get what's called a priority review voucher. Priority review vouchers have a secondary market in the pharmaceutical world and have changed hands historically from anywhere between around about 60 and 350 million US dollars. So that in itself is a very significant asset to have. So assuming top-line readout here in 2020, we would anticipate the product, we would submit the data to the European and US regulators towards the end of 2020 with approval mid-2021. A little around AP103, which is our gene therapy platform. So again, this is targeting EB. So AP103 is a non-viral gene therapy platform targeting specifically dystrophic EB in the first instance, based on a platform technology that we acquired from University College Dublin. So instead of using a virus, which most other gene therapy technologies use, we use what's called a highly branched polyamino ester. We wrap a piece of plasmid DNA in a highly branched polyamino ester and we apply it topically. So this is a simple, novel topical application. Has a similar efficacy to viral vectors, so we've done additional studies with investigators in the US who've demonstrated that, in essence, this generates the same level of the same amount of collagen 7 as viral vector technologies do. This obviously addresses many of the potential immunogenicity issues that exist with viral vectors. These images here are from a xenograft model. So in essence, what you're doing here is you're grafting some skin from an EB patient onto the back of a mouse. These are immunohistochemistry images. Bottom left to top right, you can see a blue line here. That's called the basement membrane zone. So this is the control. What you're looking for here is a pink color, the pink color being collagen 7. So you can see in this control, there's no collagen 7. After a single application of AP103, you can see a very faint pink line here. After 3 applications of AP103, you can see a very strong pink line there. Therefore, we're demonstrating that we are replacing the collagen 7 that's missing in these patients. Over the next few months, years, we have some interesting data coming through. So AP101 top-line data, we're looking here in 2020. We expect top-line data in the proof of concept FCS study as well. And as I mentioned, we're anticipating approval of AP101, assuming the positive outcome in our phase 3 study. Very briefly, because I see I'm out of time, Amryt Pharma, we're a revenue-generating commercial biopharmaceutical company with a series of innovative assets, commercial assets and late-stage development assets. We now have the financial flexibility to develop and launch these assets. We have a very strong team who've previously worked in multinational pharmaceutical companies and made a lot of money for investors. So I appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Is the company sufficiently funded to develop drugs in the pipeline?
Absolutely. So we have enough cash on our balance sheet to take our assets through development, but certainly AP101 through development and onto the market.
So by definition, these are very rare diseases. The first one you said was 1 in a million, I think. So I'm just wondering about pricing and reimbursement, particularly in the European market, where it can be very difficult.
That's a great question. And that's why we have some of the most experienced people who've ever done this. So my colleague Dave Allmond has been spectacularly successful at doing this type of stuff previously. As I always say to people, there's no point in actually getting your drug approved nowadays. Well, there is point in getting your drug approved, but that's not the final hurdle. The final hurdle is actually your market access, working with the health technology assessors around Europe, such as NICE. So it's building a very strong health economic model. Clearly, there are, these patients, if you look at EB patients, the quality of their life and the cost associated with managing these patients is very, very significant. So in terms of putting your price around these assets, you build it around the expectations of what the costs are for managing patients with this horrendous disorder.
You had, in previous times, you said that you had hoped to have a quote in America. You've not mentioned it tonight. Is that gone away?
That is very much on our radar at this point in time. And as I mentioned, if you compare similar organizations with similar revenue streams that we have, so if you look at a company like Retrophin, a US NASDAQ-listed company, very similar to us, revenues a little north of what ours are. Their market cap, I think, today is around about 560 million. Ours is about 170 million. So you can imagine that is very important for us at this point in time.
Thank you.
I had one question, Kieran, if I may, about MYLEPTA in particular. So forgive me if I pronounce these words incorrectly. You mentioned the total current revenues were 2018 revenues, $71.4 million primarily from US sales, where it's approved for full lipodystrophy, but you're hoping to go for partial in the States, and also you now have full and partial in Europe.
Yes.
In terms of the size of the market growth then, from what you're achieving in the US at the moment to now adding Europe, and if you manage to get the partial in the States as well, what does that do for the potential size of the market for that one?
Well, we see it potentially at least doubling over time. Clearly, one of the challenges, as this gentleman here asked around pricing in Europe, is, will we get a similar kind of price in Europe to that which we get in the US? It's very much around how we work with the HTAs here in Europe, but we do believe the opportunity here is very significant and certainly equivalent, if not more, than the US. And clearly, if we get approval in in the US for PL as well, that again is a very significant opportunity for us.
Lovely. I think, Kieran, we are in the interest of time going to move on there. Thank you very much indeed, Kieran. Thank you.
Thanks.